everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. Today I'm going to do a little bit of a discussion video because I recently received some feedback on a short story that I wrote, and I didn't find it that helpful. And so I wanted to kind of share my opinions on why I think that was, as well as just kind of discuss doing your research before you enter contests, especially if you pay to enter them, and a friendly reminder to everybody out there, whether you are submitting short stories or poetry or in the query trenches, that reading is always subjective. So just because somebody gives you feedback that may be accurate or may not be accurate doesn't mean that your work is bad or invalid. So let's jump into why I am doing this video today. So back in November, two of my author friends reached out and wanted to do a behind the scenes collab. Like, we weren't posting any videos or talking about it on social media, but we decided to challenge ourselves. So the three of us entered this contest. The contest was a short story contest where you had to write a piece under 2,000 words within a week. And you paid to enter this. I believe it was 38 USA dollars. And once you paid and you submitted, you had a week window. So it was from Monday through Sunday in November, and it had to be under 2,000 words. It also had to follow parameters. So you were given the theme, and this theme was cozy fantasy, but you didn't have the specifics of what you had to include in it until the day of. So it was really a challenge. You had to think of a story, do the story, and then work within these parameters as well as a word limit. So it was fun. Honestly, I had a really good time. And they were at least transparent that it would likely be about 3 months before the winners were announced. So the winners were announced first, and I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty sad when I didn't see my name up there. I also didn't see my two author friends' names up there, and none of us even got an honorable mention. And I was like, wow, that sucks. I don't know how many people entered. They were not transparent with that, but it's one of those things. Rejection is what rejection is. And at this point, I'm pretty used to it. So I wasn't completely wrecked by this decision, but I really was I felt very, very confident with my piece. And I also, outside of our little three group, I had one other friend read it over and provide feedback. And I believe between the three people that read the story, it was pretty strong. It is in a middle grade perspective. This is a character that I have written another story for, so I felt like the voice was good. But, I couldn't necessarily pinpoint why it didn't get picked, and that was fine. What I completely forgot is that they did say that they were going to give feedback. So when I got a secondary email a couple days after that announcement, I was like, oh, this is great. I'm gonna understand what didn't work for them in this time. And so now I'll share the feedback that I got because it's not very long. So this is split up into two reviewers. Now I'm gonna say that I don't know if I have one reviewer or two reviewers, because I was under the impression, based on the parameters that were on their website and social media, that at least two people would be reviewing this, and then it would be decided if it's moving on or not. But in the feedback form, it just says reviewer one twice. So I am unsure, honestly, of how many reviewers actually read this. And if it's only one reviewer, maybe they had a list the positives and then list the negatives. But I didn't read it at first like that. I read it as two different people. So I'm not sure. I'm now thinking it might just be one person. But here is the first part that I read. This story was a fun Yuletide romp with a delightful cast of characters. It was also a nice touch to use the slowly shortening candle as an indicator that time was running out. I also appreciated the way you used cozy elements to ground this story, despite the spookier elements that Maisie is more attuned to than others in the house. By having your characters create gifts, you had a nice spin on cozy fantasy elements like baking and tea drinking. I also found myself wanting to know more about the world you've created in this story. Nice job. So obviously, I think if anybody's watching this, you're probably like, wow, that was a great review. And so I was a little bit baffled when I read that, and I'm like, what? How did I not move forward in this contest then? Which is now why I'm thinking maybe it was just one reviewer giving like a pros and cons, because this was the second piece then that I received. To help ground readers in this story, it would help to have some additional world building pieces. It's a little confusing that a Krampus story exists in this world alongside a holiday like Yule. At the same time, there's magic, kobolds, and other fantasy elements. These things are fine to mesh together if you explain a bit, but as they are, they read more like a hodgepodge of different elements rather than a cohesive world. Lastly, you also jump between present and past tense a few times. This takes your reader out of the story and can be very jarring, so it's best to pick one and stick to it. So I think it's important when you get feedback to really sit with it and digest it. Sometimes we have initial reactions, and honestly, like I used to be one even more than I am currently, but I still am to some degree, where I have knee-jerk reactions where I just want to fight people like, oh, you don't understand my story. And I think that's pretty valid. And as I said, when I first wrote my very, very first book and I asked for beta reader feedback and we got these random reviews, it was really hard sometimes to take the criticism, but sometimes criticism is necessary in order to make your world better. So what I like to do is I might have a knee-jerk reaction, but then I sit on it and I think about it and I process what I could possibly gain from this information. And then I'll go back, and if I can, I apply it. I am now much better with receiving feedback and being able to actually take what is worthwhile and make my story better. So my initial reaction when I received and read the second piece of this was, this doesn't make sense to me. And I'll explain 2 reasons why. When I looked at this review, there are just some things that are false in it. And like, they're undeniably false. So I think like I was just very like taken back by this is the feedback for me, because it just doesn't make sense. So case in point, the main thing is they said that they don't understand how Krampus, Yule, and kobolds all exist in the same world, which to me just signifies that this person has no idea about German folklore and didn't care to look into it. And maybe that's just them being ignorant, or maybe they just truly like made an honest mistake. I'm not sure. But Yuletide is traditionally a Germanic pagan tradition. Krampus comes from German folklore, and kobolds, which are kind of, I guess, like a goblin character, are also Germanic in nature. For them to say that these things don't mesh together, to me, doesn't make sense. And I did confer with other people. I conferred with all 3 people who read my story just to be like, am I being fair on this review? And they all agreed with me that no, like, it makes sense. The piece that I would agree with is that I do have quite a lot of fantasy elements in this story. So outside the Germanic influence, you know, we're set in kind of like a mountain countryside, like they're isolated, and it's wintertime. So the Yule, Krampus, and Kobold still do make sense. My main cast of characters is a hodgepodge found family. We have a witch mother, a vampire father, and an elf child, along with the kobold, who is a part of the family. So I get it. I do get that, like, there is a lot of, like, fantasy things going on, but ultimately they still tie in together because, like, witches and vampires and elves are just traditional fantasy stories. So maybe, like, if I just didn't make them all different creatures, this person would have been satisfied. But as stands, I don't really find it as a valid criticism of the story because the core part of it is Germanic folklore. Needless to say, that was a really weird piece of criticism. Secondly, the part where it says that I jump between present and past tense a few times and it's very jarring, to me, makes it seem that this person does not know how writing works. And I know that's very harsh because I don't know this person. But I'll read to you one of the jarring past and present tenses. And again, it just kind of doesn't seem valid to me. Maisie stares up at her mother with rounded eyes. amazed and horrified at the demonic entity that could enter their quiet home without warning. She begged her mother for 3 years to tell her the story, but had always been met with, "You're too young." Maisie bites her lip, refusing to admit that maybe mom was right. So, when I'm reading that paragraph, this whole story is in present tense, but we do talk about the past for a minute there. And in grammar land, when you're in present tense and you're writing like with S's and like, she acts, she thinks, when you go to the past tense, you then have to add a past tense verb. So begged or thought or pleaded, those are all things you have to do. If this was set in the like past tense, so if I had said, mom continued getting up from the sofa and placing her grimoire back on its podium, then when I reference the past tense, then it would have been, she had begged her mother for years. So I don't know if this reader just often reads in the past tense and not present tense, and maybe it was just confusing for them. But again, in that scene, that section, it's valid grammar. It's nothing wrong. Even with, Maisie stares up with her mother with rounded eyes. So rounded is technically a past tense, but that's like a descriptor. And amazed and horrified, like I could see maybe why they would be, again, questioning like, oh, amazed and horrified. There's really, I don't know. And that you guys could let me know too. Like I'm reading that sentence and I'm like, I don't think amazed and horrified is wrong either. But if someone has like actual grammar there, let me know, okay? But otherwise, like that's the only instance that I really read that is wrong. So it's just one of those things. So after sitting on it, and then I was like, this could be a really good teaching moment for other people too, because I think ultimately where I want this discussion to go is that sometimes you're gonna get feedback that is not helpful. And this might be when you're reading from beta readers and they just have a strong preference for something that you don't agree with because it's your story. It could be from the feedback you get submitting short stories, and maybe it's just not accurate to what you need it to be. It could also be from like editors, from what I'm learning with other people who are traditionally published or have agents that are representing them. Sometimes editors also just don't get your vision, or agents don't get your vision. There's a lot of people who get R&Rs on their query package, and some people decide not to go for that, and then other people do. There's also people that get an R&Rs for editorial before they get picked up by a publisher. So all throughout this process, you may get feedback that does not fundamentally agree with you or doesn't make sense. That's not to say that we should just completely cast it aside. I do think there's value. Like I said, maybe because of the world that I created and it is a short story, having the Germanic influences as well as your traditional fantasy elements could be a little bit much for people. My readers that I had for this going into the contest didn't think that way, but not everybody is going to agree, especially because those people are on my side. We're critique partners. So I think it's just a reminder that, this is not to get discouraged. Sometimes we're going to get rejection and get absolutely nothing back, and that sucks. Sometimes we're going to get rejection, and it's going to be hard truths, but it's going to be truths, and you're going to need to take that feedback in and apply it. And it may be hard, or it may be difficult, and it may just suck, but you can do it. And then there's going to be those random times that you get something back, and you're like, I just don't agree. And this is probably one of the 3, maybe times that I have ever vehemently disagreed with feedback. And that leads me to my next point, as just a friendly reminder as well. If you guys are doing short story publications, it's really, really important to ask questions, to get all the information. The contest that I did, I'm not saying it's a scam. I think like they obviously are paying the people to have their prize money, like whoever won and placed, and they obviously do care about the community. I don't think there was anything wrong on that end. So I'm not going to call it a scam, but I think for me, after I did this contest and I went back and I tried to, I had to take a brief second because my dog decided to go nuts on here. But what I was trying to say is that when I had first entered this contest, I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty hard to navigate the website and find all the information because all the information on the contest was not in one place. And I don't agree with that, but that is what they decided to do. And so every time I kept going back to the website, I was finding new information about this contest. And ultimately, I didn't like how they did the judging process, and I don't think it's the fairest one out there. That is absolutely my opinion. Other people can be completely different in their opinions. But the judging was very confusing, and I still don't know if it's accurate or not. But had I really found that before I committed and spent money to enter this contest that had absolutely no payout in the end for me, because not only did I not place and get money back, I also didn't get feedback that I could actually apply to my story. I ultimately found that the review process was lacking. It wasn't clear if you absolutely got 1 or 2 reviewers to read your story. It also seemed that they would group the stories by like 20. And so one person would get 20 stories and pick through that and then pick the top 5, I believe. Which to me, this is why I don't think it's fair, is because if you only have 1 reviewer reading stories, reading is subjective. So not everybody who reads your piece is going to think it's the best, whereas somebody else might. And I think they lack a fair judgment if only 1 person is reading 20 stories. And there's nothing to say too that you could get 20 pieces that are like the bottom of the barrel, and somebody else could get 20 pieces that are the top of the barrel. And because you're not having multiple people reading this, it's then like very inconsistent. So yeah, that's just my opinion. But had I read that beforehand, because I did not read it, it was not on the main page. I actually had to go search on the website to go find that. And because I didn't know it initially, I think I would have not entered. I'm glad I wrote this story. I love the world that this created, and maybe one day I will make a cute little middle grade story about it. But right now it's just fun to write these short stories in the universe, and I definitely think like I love it. But I'm not happy that I lost my money and then got 1 reviewer's feedback that is not applicable to my story. So this is your last piece of advice, is just to make sure if you are entering things, you know what you're submitting to, you know what the parameters are. And if it's something like a website that has pieces in multiple places, you read thoroughly. That was my mistake, and that is the lesson that I learned in this, is that if contests are promising cash payouts, and they're pretty lucrative because I think the top prize was almost $2,000, I definitely needed to be more thorough in my pre-research for this contest. So those are my thoughts, and that's my little piece of advice as a writer who jumped the gun a little bit too much in this writing contest. As I said, I'm not going to name the contest because I don't think they're doing anything wrong. Like, they're not scamming people. It just wasn't a valuable part of my time for this personally. But I'm not going to dissuade people from going and joining it. I think it's still something good to exercise and to gain experience on. And from the other 2 authors that I did this with, there were pieces of advice that were applicable to them that they were able to take in and appreciate. So it definitely did not seem like every reviewer gave the same feedback or the same unhelpful feedback as they did me. I think I'm just a unique case because I included Germanic folklore and I included present tense. And if you're not familiar with Germanic folklore and you don't read a lot in present tense, you may not know how the grammar works then. So that's where we're at. But yeah, let me know if this was helpful for you guys. I just wanted to share my thoughts. I wanted to share it mostly because I think this is something that some people would get discouraged about, but this is also just like the part of publishing in general. Like, it's not always going to feel fair. It's not always going to be great. And you just got to keep going forward with it. You know, every rejection is still you putting your work out there and doing the thing. And it's hard to do. So yeah, that's where we're at, guys. So thank you so much for sticking around and listening to my rambles today. If you have any questions down below, let me know. Also, I will leave link down below my short story live stream that I had done about how to get into short story publication. If you're interested, I will leave that link down below. And that's it for me. So until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.